I have served the Galactic Union for 19 years. I have written 600 official reports. I have described plagues, border wars, famines, and the slow collapse of civilizations too proud to ask for help. I have always found the right words, but when I try to describe what the humans did at Miraval, my words feel small. I will try anyway. Someone has to tell this story, and I was there. My name is Veska Torin. I am a Selvari, tall, feathered, hollow-boned, built for cold winds and high places. I serve as a communications officer aboard the Galactic Union Diplomatic Relay Station orbiting Ketha 4. For 3 years, I had been the primary point of contact between the Union and the human species. I thought I understood them. I thought they were a curious, loud, strangely intense young species, gifted with unusual endurance and an odd habit of forming emotional bonds with everything, including machines. I liked them. I found them entertaining. I did not yet understand them at all. It began with a distress call. The signal came in fragmented and raw, broadcast on every open frequency without encryption. That alone told me the sender was desperate. It came from Miraval, a small green world on the edge of Union space. The Tavari people lived there. Gentle, soft-spoken, agrarian. They had no military, no fleet, no powerful allies. They were not even full members of the Union. They had applied for membership twice and been told to wait. The message was from their planetary health minister. Her voice was shaking. She said a plague had broken out across 3 continents simultaneously, which was unusual enough by itself. She said it was spreading faster than anything their medical system could handle. She said millions were already showing symptoms: respiratory failure, organ decay, death within days. She was begging anyone who could hear her to send medical aid. I logged the signal. I forwarded it through Union channels as protocol required, and then I sat back in my chair, because I already knew what would happen. A committee would be formed. The committee would request a jurisdictional analysis. The analysis would take weeks. A subcommittee would debate whether Miraval qualified for emergency aid, given their non-member status. Someone would raise the question of funding. Someone else would raise the question of precedent. And while all of this happened, the Tavari would receive a formal message expressing the Union's deep concern and sincere sympathy. They would not receive a single doctor. I forwarded the distress call to the human embassy as well. They were on my standard contact rotation. I expected nothing from them either. Humanity had been an associate member of the Union for only 5 years. They were a minor species in galactic terms. One small world, a handful of colonies, a modest fleet. They had no obligation to Miraval. They had no treaty with the Tavari. I assumed they might send a polite response, maybe a small medical frigate if they were feeling generous. 2 hours later, I noticed something strange. Human communication traffic around my station had increased by over 400%. The signals were encrypted, dense, and moving fast across multiple channels. I caught fragments: fleet mobilization codes, logistics orders, supply chain activation commands. One phrase repeated across several transmissions, a phrase I had never encountered before: Grey Mercy Protocol. I contacted my human counterpart, Captain David Okafor. He was a calm man, the kind who always had a small joke ready, and a warm expression on his wide, dark face. He was not calm now. He was not joking. He was terse, focused. When I asked what was happening, he said only 4 words. "We heard the call. We are responding." I pressed him. "What kind of response? A medical team? A hospital ship?" He paused. Then he said, "Something like that." 6 hours after the distress call, my station's long-range sensors detected a human battle group dropping out of faster-than-light travel nearby. I pulled up the data and stared at my screen. This was not a medical convoy. These were warships, heavy cruisers in tight formation, carrier escorts running with fighter wings deployed. And at the center of the formation, a vessel I had never seen before, enormous, dark-hulled, designated UHS Nightingale. I learned later that the name was a reference to a human healer from their history. The humans aboard told me the name was a bit ironic. I did not understand what they meant at the time. I do now. I opened a channel to Okafor and asked him, with as much composure as I could manage, why humanity was sending a war fleet to answer a medical emergency. His face on my screen was dead-eyed serious. No trace of his usual warmth. He said, "Because we read the full spectrum analysis on that plague, Veska. It is not natural. Someone made it, and someone deployed it. He told me the humans had already identified the biological weapon's chemical signature. It matched a known design pattern from the hegemony of Keth, a large, militaristic empire that had been pressuring Miraval for years to surrender territory and mining rights. The Tavari had refused every demand. Now they were dying by the hundreds of thousands. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I asked Okafor what the humans planned to do. He looked at me through the screen and said, "We are going to cure the plague, and then we are going to have a conversation with the people who made it." I requested permission to embed aboard the Nightingale as a Union observer. It was granted within the hour. I wanted to witness what happened next. I also, if I am being honest, did not trust the humans not to start a war. I thought someone needed to be there to report the truth. What I found aboard the Nightingale changed everything I believed about humanity. The ship was not simply a weapon, it was a hybrid, half warship, half mobile hospital and research laboratory. I learned that the humans had designed it after a terrible war in their own history, one where they realized they could not separate the act of fighting from the act of healing. The Nightingale carried 5,000 combat personnel on its upper decks, which bristled with weapons. Its lower decks held 3,000 medical and scientific staff working in massive, sterile biocontainment laboratories. The human doctors and xenobiologists had already begun developing a counteragent for the Tavari plague before we even arrived at Miraval. They were using the pathology data attached to the original distress signal. They worked in shifts of 4 hours, sleeping briefly and returning. They argued with each other loudly and passionately, shouting across laboratories, and then they would suddenly stop, nod, and collaborate as if they shared one mind. I had never seen anything like it. I watched a young scientist, a woman with red hair and dark circles under her eyes, crack a protein fold that would become the key to saving Tavari children. She sat down at her workstation, put her face in her hands, and wept. A Marine standing guard near the door walked over, set a cup of hot coffee beside her without a word, and returned to his post. She drank it, wiped her eyes, and went back to work. The Galactic Union has thousands of species. Some are far more intelligent than humans. Some are stronger, faster, longer-lived. But I have never encountered a species that wages compassion with the same ferocity that other species wage war. We arrived at Miraval to find a hegemony of Keth blockade, 6 warships in orbit, arranged in a standard interdiction pattern. They were officially there for what the Keth called quarantine enforcement. They were letting no one land. The Tavari below were dying. The Keth commander, a Dominarch named Sular, broadcast a warning on an open channel. His voice was smooth, confident, unhurried. He declared that Miraval was under Keth protective jurisdiction due to the outbreak. No foreign vessels were permitted to approach. I stood on the Nightingale's bridge and watched Admiral Yuna Tanaka receive this message. She was a small woman, gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, hands clasped behind her back. She listened to every word without expression. Then she opened a channel. The exchange was short. Sular was condescending. He told Tanaka that humans had no authority in this region. He called humanity a recent addition to the galactic community. He suggested they return to their small corner of the spiral arm and focus on their own affairs. Tanaka listened to all of it. Then she spoke, and this is the moment I understood humanity for the first time. She did not threaten. She did not raise her voice. She did not posture or boast. She said, "Dominarch, I have 3,000 doctors aboard this ship who have spent the last 48 hours building a cure for the weapon you deployed against a defenseless world. Those doctors are going to land on Miraval. The only question you need to answer is whether your ships will be in orbit to watch, or in orbit as debris." Silence on the channel. Sular began to respond with bluster. Tanaka cut the transmission. She turned to her tactical officer and said, "Take us in." The next 30 minutes were the most terrifying of my life. The Keth fired first. A volley across the Nightingale's bow. A warning. Tanaka did not flinch. She did not even blink. The human fleet responded, not with a warning of their own, but with a full tactical engagement. I gripped my console and watched. The humans did not fight the way the Keth expected. They fought in coordinated patterns that shifted mid-engagement, adapting in real time as if every ship in the fleet could sense what the others were doing. I learned later about human neural-linked tactical networks, technology that allowed their commanders to share awareness across the entire battle group. It was remarkable. It was also deeply unsettling. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes. 4 of the 6 Keth ships were disabled. Engines dead, weapons offline, drifting in orbit. The remaining 2 turned and ran. Not a single Keth vessel was destroyed. The humans used precision strikes to remove the ability to fight without removing the ability to survive. When it was over, I turned to Okafor, who was standing beside me on the bridge. I asked him why they did not simply destroy the enemy ships. He looked at me with an expression I could not fully read and said, "Because we are here to save lives, Veska. All of them, even the ones shooting at us." I did not know how to respond to that. With the blockade broken, the Nightingale deployed. Medical shuttles descended on Miraval in a coordinated swarm, dozens of them, spreading across the 3 most affected continents simultaneously. I went groundside with the first wave. What I saw on the surface will stay with me for as long as I live. Tavari cities were in chaos. Their hospitals had been overwhelmed days ago. The sick were lying in the streets, in parks, in the open doorways of buildings. Funeral fires burned in the fields beyond every settlement, the smoke rising in gray columns that could be seen for miles. The smell was something I cannot describe and do not want to. And then the humans arrived. They were relentless. They set up field hospitals in hours, unfolding modular structures and filling them with equipment I had never seen before. They adapted their cure, the one they had developed during the journey, to Tavari physiology, with a speed that Union xenobiologists would later call impossible. Human Marines secured supply lines and established perimeters around medical sites, not with aggression, but with calm, steady authority. They directed frightened Tavari civilians with hand signals and gentle voices, even though most of them did not speak the Tavari language. I watched a human combat medic, a giant man, broad-shouldered, with scars on his arms and tattoos covering his hands, kneel beside a dying Tavari child. The child was small, barely old enough to walk. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin had turned the gray color that meant the plague had reached her lungs. The medic administered the counteragent with hands that were impossibly gentle for their size. He held the child against his chest and waited. 5 minutes. 10. The child's breathing steadied. Her color returned. She opened her eyes and looked up at the enormous alien creature holding her. The medic smiled at her. Then he set her down carefully, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, stood up, and moved to the next patient. He did this for 14 hours without stopping. They all did. The plague was halted within 72 hours. The death toll was terrible. Over 2 million Tavari had perished before the humans arrived. But the projections had been far worse. Without intervention, the models showed that Miraval would have lost 40% of its population within a month. The humans had cut that number by a factor of 10. The Tavari Planetary Council addressed Admiral Tanaka in a broadcast that reached every corner of their world. Their leader, an elderly woman whose name I later learned was Counselor Merritt, stood before the camera with tears running openly down her face. She said that when she sent the distress call, she believed no one would come. She said her people had already begun saying goodbye to each other. Tanaka stood at attention and said nothing. She simply nodded. The political aftermath unfolded the way it always does. The Keth hegemony denied everything. They claimed the plague was a natural occurrence, and that their blockade had been a humanitarian measure. The Galactic Union issued a formal statement expressing concern and calling for an independent investigation. No investigation was ever conducted. Bureaucracy continued as it always has. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the communications that crossed my station in the weeks that followed. The smaller species of the Union, the ones without powerful allies, the ones who had always assumed they would face catastrophe alone, they had all watched what happened at Miraval. They had seen that when a defenseless world sent a cry for help into the void, one species answered. Not the oldest, not the strongest, not the most advanced, the newest member, the loud ones, the strange ones, the ones everyone had dismissed as minor. Months later, after I had returned to my station and filed my report, I sat with Captain Okafor over a drink he called whiskey. It burned my throat, but I had grown fond of human customs. I asked him the question that had been circling in my mind since Miraval. Why did they respond so fast, so hard, for a world that was not theirs, for a people they had never met? He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me a story from human history. A parable, he called it. about a traveler who was beaten and left to die on a road. Several respected people passed by and did nothing. Then a stranger, someone from a group the traveler's own people considered beneath them, stopped. The stranger treated the traveler's wounds, carried him to shelter, and paid for his care. Okafor said the story was thousands of years old. He said every human child learns it. He said it was one of the oldest ideas their species carried with them into the stars. Then he said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. We know what it is like to suffer and have no one come, Veska. We have done it to each other. We have watched our own people die while others looked away. We swore we would never do that to anyone else. Not ever again. He finished his drink. I finished mine. We sat in silence for a while. I have thought about that conversation every day since. I have thought about the nightingale, and the doctors who worked until they collapsed, and the Marine who handed coffee to a crying scientist, and the medic who held a child he had never met, and cried when she lived. They expected doctors. Warships arrived instead. But the warships brought doctors. And that, I think, is the most human thing I have ever seen.